The night was merciless, a scream lost in the roar of iron wheels, then silence broken only by the thundering train fading into the distance. They had done the unthinkable. Her own blood had cast her out, pushing her from a moving train as though she were nothing but dead weight. Her body slammed cruelly against the earth, tumbling through dust and underbrush until the world dissolved into darkness. She was young, pregnant, her fragile frame battered, her spirit torn apart. In that terrible moment, Lena Nekwasi was no longer a daughter, no longer a niece, no longer family. She was an unwanted burden abandoned in the shadows. Death seemed poised to claim her, yet fate refused to be silent. In the thick of that lonely forest, where owls kept watch and the air hung heavy with secrets, one man walked. A hunter with eyes that knew the weight of loss. Kato Mabalu, moving with the quiet step of a man used to surviving alone, felt the pull of something unusual. A faint cry too soft for beasts, too fragile for the wind. He followed it, and there she was, broken, unconscious, yet clutching stubbornly to life, as though the child in her womb demanded she endure. He didn't pause to weigh his choices. Hunters are trained to hesitate before they strike, but Kato did not hesitate to save. Without a word, he gathered her in his arms, the faint rise and fall of her breath pressing against his chest like a fragile promise, and carried her away from the night that had betrayed her. The forest's path was narrow, tangled with roots twisted like gnarled fingers reaching from the dirt as though determined to trip him. But Kato walked forward, muscles steady despite the heaviness in his arms that felt far greater than her slight body. It was as if he carried the world itself, the weight of two quiet lives, one barely hanging on and another not yet born. The wind whispered through the treetops, owls hooted, and branches cracked underfoot as though the forest itself was watching in solemn silence. Step after step, until at last his cabin appeared. A modest refuge of mud brick and timber, hidden away in solitude like the man who lived there. He pushed the wooden door open with his shoulder. Inside was plainness itself. Hard-packed earth underfoot, a small rough table with an oil lamp flickering weakly, the air marked by the faint scent of roasted game from earlier in the evening. In that humble space, he bent carefully and laid her down on a simple mat. For a moment he paused, studying her pale face, fragile, injured, yet carrying something sacred. She was more than one person. She was a trembling vessel of two fragile lives, and he knew immediately a greater burden had been placed in his arms than any animal he had ever dragged from the woods. He hurried to a clay pot, drew out fresh river water, and soaked a cloth. Patiently, he began tending to her wounds, each cut whispering of violence and betrayal. His hands, steady from years spent hunting, now traced gentleness over her battered skin. As he worked, memories rose of his mother, Mama Essie, who had once murmured ancient prayers by firelight whenever sickness touched the family. And so he whispered them now, his voice quiet but firm, a chant to chase away evil, a plea for strength. May the ancestors guard this fragile breath. May pain not claim what is still waiting for life. His words fell like soft embers, landing on the silence of the room. Lena stirred, her eyes opening for a trembling instant. They were cloudy, unfocused, her lips cracked and quivering as if trying to form a sound. Instead came a muffled groan, weak but stubborn, proof that she was not yet surrendering. Kato squeezed her hand firmly. His jaw was set, his voice low but steady. You will not die in my hands. The air itself seemed to pause at that vow, as though listening closely. The fire inside the small stove popped in reply, confirming his promise with sparks. The night turned long and heavy. Fever took hold of her, twisting her body in waves of pain, while Kato knelt beside her, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, whispering small fragments of comfort. She was carrying life even as death tried to claim her, and the pregnancy made her suffering sharper. In those hours, Kato was less the hunter who tracked prey and more the guardian who refused to abandon the fallen. His instincts, once sharpened only to kill, shifted now toward protecting. The cabin filled with quiet sounds. The crackle of wood, her faint moans, his steady breathing. When dawn finally bled gold across the walls, Lena opened her eyes again. Though weak, she gazed at him, into the worn face of a stranger whose arms had shielded her. She said nothing, but a single tear slipped free, trailing silently to the mat beneath her. Kato brushed it away with calloused fingers, and answered that unspoken question in her eyes with calm certainty. Do not waste your strength speaking. Save it, the battle is not over. But now, you are not alone. Sunlight shimmered across mud bricks and dust motes, announcing a new day. Outside, roosters crowed, the village beyond stirred in its usual rhythm. Yet inside the quiet cabin, extraordinary change had already begun. A man long resigned to solitude was now the protector of a wounded mother and an unborn child. That unlikely rescue had lit a spark neither of them yet understood, one destined to change their fates forever. The next morning came heavy with silence. The sun crept through narrow cracks in the walls, slicing beams across the air where dust swirled lazily. Lena stirred at last. Her body screamed with aches. The bruises from the fall, the heavy throb of her pregnancy, the poison of betrayal gnawing at her spirit. Slowly, she propped herself against the wall, eyes lowered, her gaze fixed on the floor rather than his face. Her silence was not just exhaustion. It was a shield, built from layers of distrust. The door creaked open. Cato entered, carrying a bucket of cool river water in one strong arm. He didn't fill the silence with words. He simply set down the bucket near the door, sliced cassava into pieces, and placed them quietly on a wooden plate. No demands, no questions, no probing. A gesture given with respect rather than force. For Lena, who had been treated like refuse, it was strange and unexpected, to be cared for without cost, to be allowed her silence without pressure. The first days passed like this, marked by quiet routines and an almost sacred distance. Lena ate little, spoke less. Suspicion and grief bound her tightly, and memory haunted her. The look in Aunt Sword's eyes before shoving her, the curl of disgust in Cousin Wello's mouth. It returned with every blink, feeding her mistrust. For someone who had been betrayed by blood, even kindness felt dangerous. But silence is its own language, and Cato's silence was different. Not empty, not cold. It was steady, patient, like a man speaking in unspoken ways. I won't hurt you. You may take your time. He chopped wood, kept the fire burning, set water and food where she could reach them, and left her the space to breathe. That voiceless rhythm began, day after day. It was heavy at first, suffocating. Then, slowly, it became lighter, almost protective, almost safe. One morning, Lena, stubborn with pride, tried to fetch water herself. She struggled to rise, staggered, nearly collapsed. Cato, chopping wood just outside, reacted instantly. His hand caught her arm before her body could hit the ground. It was only the briefest touch, his calloused palm steadying her wrist. But it anchored her like stone. Their eyes met, fleeting yet electric. She turned away quickly, ashamed, guarded. But somewhere deep inside, the smallest crack appeared in her wall of distrust. Nights brought another kind of trial. Lena would lie awake, firelight flickering, and the silence too heavy to hold her pain anymore. Quiet sobs escaped, muffled against the cloth. At first, Cato pretended not to notice, respecting her battle. But one night, he stepped closer, crouching softly beside her, and spoke with simple honesty. Tears are also a way of surviving. That was enough. The dam inside her burst. Sobs spilled raw and deep, carrying years of rejection, fear, and loneliness. Between gasps, her first true words emerged. They threw me away, like I wasn't even human. Her voice cracked with humiliation, but also freedom, because finally it had been said. Cato didn't reply with speeches. He only placed another log on the fire, each crackle in the flames becoming his quiet vow that he was listening. From that night forward, something changed. The cabin was no longer only a shelter. It became a confessional place, a fragile sanctuary where silence no longer strangled but healed. Two souls scarred by loneliness, Cato hardened by years of isolation, Lena scarred by cruel rejection, found themselves reflected in each other. They spoke little, but every glance, every gesture said more than words could. Days turned to a slow rhythm. Lena sat in the doorway to feel the wind against her face. Cato returned from the forest with fresh meat, sometimes tossing a remark about the weather or the trail. Tiny threads of connection at first, but they grew, each one undoing the tight knots of distrust. She watched his hands, so rough, stained from hunting, yet capable of tenderness. He watched her strength, even broken, as she fought each day to rise and eat and endure. And so, almost invisibly, something beautiful began in that forgotten cabin. Without promises, without talk of a future, without even realizing it, the solitude of two fractured lives began weaving into one rhythm. For the first time, after betrayal, after grief, after silence, they were no longer completely alone. Life in the village of Encala was never quiet. The mud walls seemed to have ears, and the thatched roofs carried words from one house to another. All it took was a spark for a rumor to become a wildfire. It didn't take long for word to spread among the people. Cato and Baloo, the solitary hunter, had taken in a pregnant young woman found collapsed in the bush. At first it was just whispers. The women by the river washing clothes asked each other, "Who is this girl? Where did she come from? Why is she with him?" The men gathered at the market to trade cassava and corn chuckled under their breath. "Ah, so that's how it is. No man looks after another man's belly for free." The poison in those words spread quickly, like smoke carried by the wind. Lena, and already burdened by the rejection of her own family, felt the sting of those invisible words. She didn't need to hear them directly. It was enough to enter the village and feel the lingering stares, catch the crooked smiles, sense the sudden pauses in conversation when she passed. Every step echoed with judgment. "Don't tell me that baby's not his," they muttered, as if it were impossible to believe someone could act purely out of compassion. The cruelest part wasn't what they said. It was what they implied. Every time Lena walked to the river, she felt naked under the villagers' gaze. It was as if her entire body was marked with invisible accusations, as if her pregnancy were proof of a sin she had never committed. The silence she had found in Cato's cabin was now being threatened by the noise of the village. Cato, on the other hand, seemed carved from stone. When the rumors reached him, he didn't respond. He simply added more wood to the fire, letting the crackle of the flames be his only reply. He didn't deny, didn't explain, didn't justify. It was as if he was saying, "Let them talk, words don't feed. Don't protect, don't save." That unwavering calm irritated some and confused others. After all, the village expected reactions, expected fights, expected scandal. But Cato gave them none of the spectacle they craved. The night Lena heard the taunt spoken directly for the first time, the impact was devastating. She was returning from the river with a small basket of wet clothes when 3 women stared her down. One of them with a sharp tongue spoke loud enough for her to hear. "Anyone who lies down on the train tracks shouldn't complain when they get run over." The others laughed as if it were just a harmless joke. Lena clutched the basket tightly to her chest and walked quickly. But by the time she reached the cabin, tears were already streaming down her face. She sat in the corner, muffling her sobs in the cloth. Cato, who had been sharpening his hunting knife, watched in silence. After a while, he walked over slowly, set the basket aside, and simply said, "The fire speaks to listen to it." The wood was burning strongly, crackling loudly. Lena, still sobbing, lifted her eyes to the flames. She understood without words that fire consumes all that is weak, all that has no roots. The ville's gossip was like smoke. It spread fast, but eventually vanished into thin air. That night, Lena dreamed of her late mother who used to tell her daughter, "The people's words, don't cook our food. Don't lie down on words that won't fill your stomach." She woke up with that memory, and though the pain was still there, a seed of resistance had been planted inside her. The days passed. The rumors grew, morphing into invented stories. Some said Cato was the real father of the child. Others swore he had kidnapped her in the forest. There were even those who claimed the pregnancy was divine punishment and that both of them would be judged. But every time Lena looked at the hunter, she saw the same calm strength. He remained silent, tending the fire, cleaning his weapons, bringing food from the forest. That quiet, unwavering steadiness was what kept her standing. The village could talk, mock, and spread poison. But inside the cabin, in the warmth of the fire and the quiet respect of simple gestures, Lena found the opposite of what she had lost. Dignity, and little by little, though still wounded by the words, she began to believe that the village's voice wouldn't be the final word over her life. Nights by the river carried a different kind of silence. The sound of water rushing over stones, the distant croaking of frogs, and the rustling of leaves brought a calm that couldn't be found within the village. It was there that Lena and Cassie sought relief from the weight she carried in her chest and in her belly. Many times she would walk down to the river with cloths to wash, not only out of necessity, but also to hide from the stares and sharp tongues. That night, the full moon cast its light over the surface of the water. Lena knelt at the riverbank, dipping the cloths and slowly wringing them out. The cold water seemed to soothe the fever in her soul, if only for a few moments. Her mind still echoed with the villagers' cruel words, looping again and again. But between one twist and the next, she sighed, trying to find some sign of hope. Then she felt something different. A strong, unexpected movement passed through her belly. Lena gasped, placing a hand over her abdomen. The baby had moved before small flutters. But this was a firm kick, as if the child were announcing its presence to the world. The impact was so sudden she nearly lost her balance on the slippery stones at the water's edge. Ketum, who had gone hunting earlier and was returning by the trail, saw from a distance as Lena leaned dangerously forward. He dropped the bundle of firewood he was carrying and ran toward her, reaching out just as she began to slip. He grabbed her hand firmly. Her eyes widened first in fear, then in relief. The contact was strong, and for a moment it felt like the entire world existed within that grip. Breathing heavily, Lena let out a timid smile. It was the first since the night she had fallen from the train. Kato, surprised, returned her gaze without saying a word. No words were needed. The gesture, the touch, and the smile spoke louder than any speech. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just the baby that had stirred inside. Hurt was Lena's heart, beginning to move again after being paralyzed for so long by pain. She sat carefully on a rock, still cradling her belly. "He's alive. He's strong," she murmured, almost to herself. Her voice carried a mix of wonder and gratitude. Kato stood beside her, expression serious, but his eyes filled with tenderness. "He'll be born a warrior," he said softly, like a truth he already knew. That night left its mark. The baby's movement wasn't just a sign of life. It was a reminder that no matter how cruel fate could be, it still held miracles in small gestures. Lena walked back to the cabin slowly, and with each step, she felt within her a strength greater than fear or rejection. For the first time, she didn't walk like a woman defeated, but like a mother carrying the future. Along the way, she remembered the stories her own mother used to tell about how every child born came with the blessing of the ancestors. When the womb speaks its life asking to come through, Mama Essie would say, Lena caressed her belly, thinking that perhaps this was the moment her mother, even from the other side, was sending her a sign of courage. Back at the cabin, Kato rekindled the fire and set a pot to boil. Lena sat near the flames, arms wrapped around her belly. The warmth of the fire, the crackling of the wood, and the quiet gaze of the hunter formed a simple scene, yet one full of meaning. The smile that had emerged by the river didn't fade completely. It stayed within her like a small flame, just enough to light the road ahead. In that moment, the solitude that once bound the two of them began to shift into something else. It wasn't full trust yet, nor a declared friendship. It was something fragile, almost invisible, but real. The feeling that there was hope that life, despite all injustice, could still bloom in dry ground. And so with the baby's first strong movement, it wasn't just Lena who was reminded that life in two realized that his cabin, once a place of silence and shadow, was beginning to pulse with a new sense of purpose. Time seemed to move slowly around Kato Embleo's cabin. Each day was marked by the sound of axes splitting wood, the scent of corn roasting over the fire, and the distant calls of birds in the forest. Lena Nakusi was beginning to settle into this new rhythm. Even though her heart still carried the shadow of abandonment, she had found a kind of temporary peace held together by the quiet strength of the hunter. But life, just when it seemed ready to rebuild itself, often found ways to resurrect the ghosts of the past. It was on a sweltering afternoon that the dust rose on the horizon. From the path leading to the cabin, figures began to appear. 3 men and 1 woman walked together, their steps steady, eyes narrowed. Lena, seeing them through the small crack in the door, felt her blood turned cold. She recognized them immediately. They were her relatives, the very ones who had pushed her from the moving train. The memory of the fall struck her like a blow. The wind on her face, the impact with the ground, the feeling of being thrown away like trash. She retreated to the corner of the cabin, clutching her belly with both hands, as if she could shield the child from another attack. Her entire body trembled. Kato, sharpening a blade just outside, looked up at the approaching group. He stood slowly, wiped his hands on his worn linen pants, and walked to the door. He placed himself squarely in front of it, a human shield, his hard eyes fixed on the visitors. The first to speak was Okatello, Lena's eldest cousin, who carried the arrogance of someone convinced of his authority. "We only came to confirm what we already knew," he said firmly. "She had no place among us anymore. She was a disgrace. What is she doing here, hiding in your cabin?" Aunt Soda, with a cold smile on her lips, added, "We thought she died in the fall. We were ready to put the matter to rest, but it seems fate had other plans." The words spoken with cruelty cut like blades. Lena closed ears, trying not to hear, but each syllable sliced deep. Kato remained still. His hand, resting on the stock of the shotgun, leaned against the wall. His voice came out deep, not loud but heavy with resolve. "No one takes what they didn't protect. If you came to reclaim what you threw away, you can turn around and leave the way you came." The silence that followed was suffocating. The relatives glanced at one another as if unable to believe that a single man would dare defy an entire family. Aunt Sword stepped forward, pointing a finger toward the cabin. "She carries our blood. That gives us rights over what's in her womb." Kato's reply was sharp, like the snap of a dry branch underfoot. "Rights. Those who have rights don't throw their own blood from a moving train. Those with rights don't treat life like a burden. You lost that right the moment you chose shame over dignity." Lena, hearing those words, cried in silence. Noon had ever stood up for her like that before. No one had ever faced down those who hurt her as an equal. Oello tried to maintain his composure, but his eyes wavered under the hunter's unflinching gaze. "This won't end here," he spat, turning and walking away. The village will hear our side. We'll show who the real disgrace is. They left slowly, stirring up dust behind them. But the weight they left behind was suffocating. Lena took a deep breath, still trembling. Kato turned to her, set the shotgun aside, and approached. His eyes asked for no thanks, no praise. He simply said in a low, almost whispered voice, "As long as I breathe, no one will lay a hand on you or the child." Those words echoed inside her like both a promise and a blessing. They didn't erase the pain or heal the past, but they gave the present a strength it hadn't had before. For the first time, Lena felt that she might not just survive, but truly live. That night, the fire in the cabin burned higher. The crackling of the wood seemed to respond to the weight of the day. Lena sat insolence, staring at the flames while cradling her belly. She could feel the child moving inside her as if sensing the battle fought by its mother and by the man who had become their guardian. The return of her cruel family hadn't brought only fear. It had also brought a revelation. She was no longer alone against the world. Someone stood for her. Someone who owed her nothing and still chose to stay. And that act, simple, steady, unshaken, had begun to write the fate that once seemed sealed the day she was thrown from the train. The tensions that once hid behind mud-brick walls and whispers by the riverbank had now become the talk of the entire village. The visit from Wello and Aunt Soda to Kadomabalu's cabin had spread like wildfire through dry grass. With every retelling, the weight of the story grew heavier. Some said Lena Enkasi was a curse, bringing shame first to her family and now to the whole community. Others in silence simply observed, torn between prejudice and compassion. It didn't take long for the matter to be brought before the Council of Elders. In the village of Enkpla, no serious decision could be made without the presence of the elders, the keepers of tradition and honor. It was in that sacred circle that disputes were judged, offenses measured, and punishments decided. For Lena, the summons felt less like a chance to defend herself, and more like a sentence being handed down. On the appointed morning, the sun was high when the community gathered beneath the great baobab tree, where the council had convened for generations. Its wider roots served as seats for the elders, and the massive trunk stood like a silent witness to every verdict. Lena arrived with hesitant steps, supported only by her own willpower. At her side, Kato walked steady, eyes fixed ahead. All her relatives were present. Okela was the first to speak, his voice full of false indignation. "Elders, this girl has brought disgrace to our family. She became pregnant out of wedlock, dragged our name through the mud, and now hides in the house of a solitary man as if she were his wife. This is an offense to our tradition. It is a shame that must be corrected." His words echoed among the people, stirring murmurs, some in agreement, others in doubt. Aunt Soda, eyes full of disdain, added, "We cast her out because honor cannot live beside a stain. If she returns to the village now, she must be judged accordingly." Until that moment, Lena had remained silent, but now tears rolled down her cheeks. Her heart pounded like it might burst. She took a deep breath, drew strength from the life growing in her belly, and for the first time raised her voice before them all. "If honor is cleansed with innocent blood, then you never understood what honor truly means." Her voice trembled, but her words sliced through the air like a sharpened blade. A heavy silence followed. Even the birds in the tree seemed to fall quiet. The elders exchanged surprised glances. Babakunda, the oldest among them, cleared his throat before speaking. "Tradition has always taught us to protect life, but also to preserve the name of the family. What we face now is a dilemma. The weight of life or the weight of shame." Division rippled through the crowd. Some whispered that Lena was right, that her family had crossed every line by throwing her from a moving train. Others shook their heads, insisting that nothing could justify the dishonor of an out-of-wedlock pregnancy. Dotun Kato, who had stood in silence, took a step forward. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence demanded respect. "She didn't ask to be here," he said. "It was her own family who threw her away like waste. And I ask you, who bears more shame? The woman who protects the child in her womb, or those who tried to kill him before he was even born?" His words struck like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread. Some began murmuring in agreement. Others looked away. The moral balance of the village was beginning to shift. Mama Essie, one of the most respected elders, stood slowly with the help of her staff. She looked at Lena with compassion and said, "There is no greater courage than protecting life when everything conspires against it. You may call her shame, but I see a mother, and a mother who faces death for her child cannot be called dishonor." Her words shattered the fragile balance of the trial. The crowd, once divided, began to lean toward compassion. Some approached Lena, offered her water, or touched her shoulder in silence. Others remained distant, still clinging to the rigidity of custom. The judgment ended with no formal verdict. No sentence was carved into the memory of the sacred tree. But something more powerful happened. The people's gaze began to change. That day marked the beginning of a quiet transformation. The once rejected girl, seen only as a burden, was beginning to awaken respect in hearts that had previously condemned her. And as the council dispersed, Lena felt that although the battle wasn't over, for the first time, the weight of shame no longer rested solely on her shoulders. The people at last were beginning to carry with her the responsibility of looking inward. The rains were late that year. The ground in the village of Incala was cracked and dry, the tree leaves drooping from thirst, and the people said the sky was silent, testing the endurance of men. It was on one of those nights of waiting that fate decided to speak. The wind began to shift, bringing heavy clouds. The smell of wet earth rose in the air, announcing the coming storm. Lena Enkosi had been feeling strange pains since dawn, a pressure in her belly, waves of contractions that made her grip the edge of the mat and breathe deep. She tried not to alarm Kato Mbalu, who worked outside, reinforcing the cabin's roof against the coming rain. But as the hours passed, the pain grew, turning into powerful waves that soaked her in sweat. When the first thunder cracked above the village, Lena cried out for the first time. The sound made Kato drop the rope he was tying around palm leaves and rush inside. He found her bent over, eyes clenched in pain, breath ragged. He didn't need an explanation. The time had come. The sky opened with lightning and thunder. The rain poured down violently, pounding the thatched roof as if the heavens were collapsing. Kato ran to the door and shouted for help, but the wind carried his voice away. The nearest houses were far, and no one would brave a storm like that to hear his call. The hunt, accustomed to facing beasts and dangers in the wild, now stood before a greater challenge, a life that needed Tobe born there. In his cabin, under the flickering light of an oil lamp, Lena clutched the cloths with all her strength, sweat running down her face. She murmured between cries, "Mama, help me! Don't let me be alone." It was a plea that reached across time, calling for Mama Essie, her late mother. As if from her could come the strength to endure. Kato knelt beside her, wiping her face with a clean cloth. "You're not alone," he said firmly, holding her hand. The labor moved quickly, each contraction more intense than the last. The lamp flickered with the wind, seeping through the gaps in the walls, casting dancing shadows on the mud. The sound of rain mixed with Lenena's strained cries, creating a symphony of pain and hope. Kato did what he could, recalling his mother's old prayers, whispering to the ancestors to guard the life about to arrive. At one point, Lena's strength gave out, and her head slumped to the side. I won't make it," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Kato gripped her hand tighter. "You've already survived the impossible. You won't stop now. Bring your son into this world, Lena. Bring him." His words, simple and steady, reached deep into her heart with a cry that seemed to tear not only her body, but also the memories of pain and rejection. Lena pushed with the last of her strength. A sharp wail rang out through the cabin, rising above the roar of the storm. The voice of a newborn, announcing his arrival, wrapped in makeshift cloths. The baby was placed in Lena's arms. She looked into his wrinkled red face, still marked by the effort of being born, and tears of relief and joy rolled down her cheeks. "He's alive. My son is alive," she whispered, pulling him close to her chest. Goto stepped back slightly, watching. The solitary man, used to the silence of the forest, now bore witness to the greatest of miracles. His usually hard expression softened. A different kind of fire burned in his eyes, like he too had been reborn that night. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin another sound reigned. The newborn's cry mingled with the fragile laughter of his mother. Even villagers from afar heard the sound. Some later said it was louder than the thunder itself. And maybe it was because in that moment, life spoke louder than death, and hope cried out stronger than shame. That stormy night birth wasn't just the arrival of a child. It was also the rebirth of Lena, proving herself stronger than those who had cast her out, and the quiet redemption of Kato, who discovered in his solitude a new purpose, to protect not just the life of wild animals, but the life of someone the world had already condemned. As the rain eased and the wind died down, the mud brick cabin became the beating heart of the entire village. There, beneath the faint glow of a lamp, not just a child was born, but a new story, one no one could ever erase. The child's crystal echoed in the villagers' memory when the footsteps of the cruel family returned once more. Not much time had passed since the storm birth. Lena Enkosi, still weak, could barely rise from the mat where she lay. Her eyes, tired yet glowing with tenderness, remained fixed on the small baby sleeping on her chest. It was as if all the pain she had carried until now had been transformed into strength by the simple act of watching him breathe. But the silence didn't last. Aunt Soda returned, accompanied by Okilo and two other men from the family. They pounded violently on Cato Ambalu's door without asking permission, as if they owned what lay within. Lena flinched at the noise, holding the child tightly with the fragility of someone fighting against forces far greater than herself. Cato stood up, lifted the shotgun resting against the wall, and placed himself in front of the entrance, blocking their way. Okello's harsh voice cut through. "We're here to take the baby. He carries our blood. He belongs to our family. He won't be raised here. A bastard under the roof of a solitary hunter." His words dripped with arrogance, as if the child were a possession, not a living, breathing soul. Inside, Lena summoned what little strength she had left. Her body was pale and still recovering from labor, but her eyes burned like fire, holding the baby to her chest. She spoke with a voice that trembled, but did not falter. "If you didn't want me, you won't have the one who chose me as his mother. This child is mine, and no one else's." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the creaking of the door under Cato's firm grip. He said little. He simply stepped forward, shoulders squared, shotgun pointed toward the ground. But his stance made it clear no one would pass. No shouting, no need to fire. His presence alone spoke louder than any threat. Ansoda, furious, spat on the ground. "You don't understand, Hunter. This isn't about want. It's about right. The boy was born of our blood. He belongs to us. You won't stop us." Cato met a glare with unflinching eyes. His voice came slow, firm. "No need to raise it. Those with rights don't abandon. Those with rights don't throw a pregnant woman off a moving train. You gave up that right the moment you chose shame over life. In this house, only those who know how to protect may enter. And you never did." Lena, hearing those words, felt something awaken in her. Her body still ached, but her heart beat strong. The baby in her arms slept peacefully, untouched by the war waging over High's existence. The men with Uello began to hesitate. In their eyes was a flicker of doubt and fear, not of the shotgun, but of the unwavering conviction Cato carried. It was as if the earth itself stood beside him, anchoring his resolve. The argument dragged on for minutes, but with each word, the family's demands grew weaker. Okello insisted. Soda screamed, but nothing shook the wall of silence and determination that Cato stood behind. In the end, they had no choice but to retreat, leaving under quiet jeers from a few neighbors who had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. When the dust from their departure settled, Lena collapsed onto the mat. Exhausted, tears streamed down her cheeks. But they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of relief. She looked at Cato and with a voice thick with emotion said, "You stayed." He simply nodded. No words were needed. He turned to tend the fire at the center of the cabin, letting the crackle of the wood speak what no speech could contain. That night, Lena fell asleep, holding her baby with a sense of safety she hadn't felt since the beginning of her pregnancy. For the first time, she truly believed that she might build a new life. Regardless of how much the past tried to tear it away, the failed attempt to take her baby had left a mark, but not of defeat. It had revealed something deeper, that a mother's love is stronger than any bloodline imposed by force. It had shown the village that Cato was no mere solitary hunter, but a silent guardian willing to risk everything for a life that wasn't even his own. And it showed fate that no matter how cruel hands tried to rip hope from her chest, Lena would never again be thrown away. Now she had roots. She had a home. She had someone who had chosen to stand by her until the end, the days following the storm and the cruel families failed. Attempt felt wrapped in a strange calm, as if the entire village of Enkela was holding its breath after what had happened. Lena Nkasi, still recovering from childbirth, spent hours watching her baby, studying every movement, every breath, every tiny gesture that confirmed her victory over death and abandonment. The boy, fragile yet full of life, seemed to carry the weight of a greater destiny, an emblem of resistance against the shame others tried to force upon her. Kite Empty, meanwhile, kept to his routine as a hunter. He left early for the forest, returning at dusk with firewood, roots, or freshly hunted game. But something had subtly shifted in him. His steps grew quicker on the way back, and his eyes lingered longer inside the cabin, as if he had finally found something stronger than the solitude that had accompanied him for years. He watched Lena with a mix of quiet respect and tenderness, never invading her space, but always present when she needed him. One morning, Lena awoke to the sound of steady knocking outside. Still half asleep, she first thought it was the trees rustling in the wind, but soon realized it was something else. She stood with effort and opened the door. There, under the shade of a mango tree, sat Cato, his calloused hands working patiently on a piece of wood. He was carving, letting the blade reveal hidden shapes known only to him. Days passed, and the sound of wood being shaped became part of the household's rhythm. Lena, curious, would watch, but Cato said nothing. He simply kept carving each stroke of the knife like a silent prayer. At times, the baby would fall asleep, lulled by the soft, rhythmic scrape of the blade against the timber. It was on a bright afternoon, the sun casting gold over the dry earth, that Cato entered the cabin carrying the result of his work. A crib, simple, made from acacia wood, but full of care. The edges were smoothed, the corners rounded so that no splinter could harm the baby. Carved discreetly into the sides were small tribal symbols. Blessings passed down from his mother. Lena raised her hands to her mouth in surprise. Her eyes filled with tears before she could even speak. Cato set the crib down beside Themet, and in a shy gesture ran his hand over the wood, as if bidding farewell to something that had demanded much of him. Then he turned to her and said quietly, "I never had a family, but today at least I help hold this one together." The words simple and sincere broke the cabin's silence like a soft thunderclap. Lena couldn't respond at first. She clutched the baby to her chest. Overcome that gift wasn't just carved wood. It was recognition, sharing a quiet surrender. It was Cato saying, without needing to say more, that he wasn't going anywhere, that he had chosen to stay with her and the child. That very night, the entire village heard about the crib. Someone walking past the cabin had seen it, and the news spread. But unlike the cruel gossip of before this time, the people didn't mock. Cato's gesture silenced sharp tongues. The community's quiet reaction to the unexpected gift spoke louder than any rumor. There was respect unspoken but present. Children from the village began to drift closer, curious to see the crib. Some women, once distrustful, left food by Lena's door, saying nothing but offering it as a sign of acknowledgement. The men who once chuckled in hushed conversations now avoided making remarks. The figure of the solitary hunter was beginning to change in their eyes. He was no longer just the strange man who lived at the edge of the woods. He was the guardian of a life, the builder of a home. Lena, sitting beside the crib, watched her baby sleep in peace. The shadows of rejection still lived inside her, but they were slowly being pushed back by the light of new gestures. The cry was more than a gift. It was a symbol of rebuilding. It proved that even after being thrown from a train after nearly being erased by cruelty, there was still space for a new beginning. That night, Cato remained outside the cabin, seated in silence, gazing at the starry sky. He wasn't looking for praise or gratitude. His heart, once hardened by solitude, now found warmth in something simple. The quiet certainty that he had given that woman and her child a solid base, if only made of wood on which they could build a new life. And so the unexpected gift didn't just transform the village's view of them. It transformed Lena and Cato themselves, binding them in a silent bond, one that grew stronger with each passing day. Life in the village of Ancala carried on, but something silent and deep had begun to shift in the hearts of its people. Lena and Coscience, the woman who walked beneath scornful glances and venomous whispers, was now met with a new kind of curiosity. She was no longer just the pregnant girl rejected by her own kin. With the birth of her child, Cato Mabalis' unwavering stand and the hand-carved cradle, the community's view of her was beginning to change. At first, the signs were small. A neighbor left a pot of porridge quietly at the cabin door. The next day, someone placed a bundle of firewood. No words, no explanations. Lena was taken aback by each gesture, but accepted them insolence, understanding that they were more than offerings. They were recognition, the beginning of a long-overdue reparation. It was the children who first broke the wall of prejudice. They gathered around the cabin, laughing, asking to see the baby. Some dared to step inside, offering little gifts. Wildflowers, shiny pebbles, branches turned into toys. To them, there was no shame or disgrace, only the wonder of a new life born in the midst of a storm. One afternoon, while Lena nursed her son beneath the shade of the mango tree, one of the girls from the village with short braids and shining eyes called her Mother of Courage. The nickname quickly spread among the children who repeated it in chorus whenever they saw her. The first time Lena heard it, her heart clenched. She was no longer the disgrace, the dishonor, the rejected one. Now she had a new name born from the innocent lips of those who saw not her past, but her strength to stand. Slowly, even the adults began to adopt the title. When they needed guidance, they came to her. Lena, who had learned through pain to carry heavy burdens, spoke words that soothless, not from books, but from healed wounds. Some women came to confide their own sorrows. Absinthe bans, lost children, humiliations born in silence. Lena listened closely and in her gentle voice spoke simple truths. The earth may reject the seed, but when the rain comes, it blooms all the same. Those words echoed, taking root in the lives of those who heard them. And so the woman who had been cast out to die became someone people turned to when they needed the strength to live. Cato watched this transformation in silence. He remained the solitary hunter, but now he was no longer just the strange man from the forest's edge. He had become the guardian of a respected home, part of a new narrative unfolding in the villager's heart. When people sought him, it was to ask about hunting, the forest, or life itself. No more laughter behind his back. Now when he passed, the men gave him a respectful nod. The baby who slept in the hand-carved cradle had become a symbol of change. He represented a life that had endured, a hope born from rejection. Every smile he gave was like an answer to the cruel words of the past. Lena, watching all of this, understood that her name had been rewritten all by the decree of the elders, nor by the will of the family who had cast her out, but by the village itself. A village that had learned to see beyond shame and appearances. Now when she walked through the market, people no longer called her by her given name. Behind her she would hear, "There goes the mother of courage." And each time she heard it, she felt her heart heal just a little more. At night, when the fire in the cabin crackled and lit the faces of Lena, Cato, and the baby, the silence no longer held loneliness, but fullness. Destiny, which had once thrown her from a moving train, had now given her new ground, a new home, and a new name. She was no longer just Lena and Cozy, their rejected girl. She was the mother of courage, the one who faced death and gave life a place to grow. And the village through her learned a lesson even the elders had failed to teach. The true shame is not in bearing a child, but in abandoning those who need protection. Lena and Kos's story no longer belonged to her alone. It passed from mouth to mouth through the village of Enkala, weaving its way into evening conversations, blending into the songs of the women by the river, and echoing in the whispers of the men at the market. Everyone knew what had happened. The young woman thrown from a moving train, the mother who survived abandonment, the woman who rose from theses of rejection. But what was once told with malice was now spoken with respect almost, as if they were a living legend. The family that once cast her out, trying to erase her from existence, lost not only their voice, but also their authority. Their words found no echo. Where once there was fear and submission, now there was only the heavy silence of shame. Uello, who once shouted before the elders, now walked the village streets with his head down. Aunt Soda, once so proud, was no longer sought out for advice. No one listened to them anymore. They had lost what they thought they owned. Honor, because honor, the village had come to learn, is not measured by control, but by the justice of one's actions. Meanwhile, in the mud brick cabin at the edge of the forest, a new home was blooming. Lena, who had arrived there, wounded, discredited, and drained of strength, now stood tall as a mother in the face of life. Every time she looked at her son, she felt victory over all those who had wished her gone. The baby grew healthy with curious eyes and an easy smile, as if he carried within him the very proof that hope never dies. Cato Malu, the solitary hunter, was no longer the same man either. The silence that once weighed on him like chains had become a space for sharing. In caring for Lena and the child, he had found redemption from a lifelong marked by loneliness. The shotgun, once his loyal companion, was no longer just a tool for survival. It had become a symbol of protection for those the world had tried to destroy. The village witness to it all had learned a lesson not written on stones or scrolls, but carved into hearts. They came to understand that true shame didn't lie in the womb of a woman who conceived outside convention, but in the cowardly act of abandoning someone in their most vulnerable hour. They learned, though belatedly, that honor is not built through expulsion, but through welcome, not through contempt, but through compassion. And it was the children, pure and unburdened, who sealed this new era. They continued to call Lena Mother of Courage, and the name stuck repeated and shared until no one remembered her by any other. Like rain that washes the dust from the earth, the new name cleansed the stain of old humiliation. She was no longer the woman thrown from the train. She was the mother who defied death and won. One night around the fire, Lena cradled her sleeping son while Cato watched in silence. The crackle of the burning wood filled the air, and the little cabin seemed to pulse with life. Lena raised her eyes to the hunter and murmured, "Fate cast me out, but God brought me here." Cato nodded slowly, eyes on the child, breathing peacefully in the carved wooden crib. They needed no more words because the essential truth was already there before them. Life reborn. And so, between the dust of abandonment and the firelight of rebirth, the story came full circle. The rejected young woman found firm roots in the humble home of a solitary man. The baby meant to perish in the silence of night became a voice of hope for an entire village. And the hunter, once wandering aimlessly through the solitude of the forest, found in caring for others the healing of his own soul. The memory of that train, the fall, the dust, and the pain would never fully disappear. But Lena knew she was no longer its prisoner. That moment had become a beginning, not a sentence. The rejection that was meant to break her had instead become the forge that made her stronger. And when years later someone would tell the tale of the Mother of Courage, They always ended with the same phrase passed from lips to lips like a proverb of the people. Fate may delay, but it never fails the just. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our